Hi everyone, it's been a few days since I made a video. I had a bit of a cold and you may hear slight tone in my voice. I have mouth ulcer. It's a little bit painful, but not so much that I can't make a video, whereas before it wouldn't have been so practical to do so. The cold's now gone, so without further ado, here it is. Um, Just Stop Oil activists have been cleared over vandalism or targeting of Stonehenge. I have a big problem with that. I think it's a terrible outcome because I think it sends out the wrong message. Now I'm going to read out the report from the BBC in a second, but just to put my cards on the table, where I stand with Just Stop Oil, quite honestly, I have contempt for them. Just Stop Oil sort of self-disbanded a few months ago, so they're no longer active. Unless they take some other form, they're no longer active. They very arrogantly boasted on their way out that they were one of the most successful civil disobedience groups of modern times. They had absolutely no remorse whatsoever for the huge stress they caused ordinary people, and for the criminal damage that they caused. What I would say to I don't I even waste time trying to find any common ground with Just Stop Oil activists. I think it's a waste of time because I honestly think they're extreme. I think they're radicalized. Anyone who says that billions, and I quote billions, of people are going to die in the next few years, how do you reason with someone like that? How do you find any middle ground? I don't think you can. So rather than try to reason with them, I would I would address their supporters and their apologists. That is, people who wouldn't themselves go out and do those stunts, but would make excuses for them and say, well, they're just people who care about the planet. They're just people who have concerns about climate change. My challenge would be this. In what logical way does vandalising an ancient monument or the grave of Charles Darwin, which is, I actually wrote into the Metro about that one, or blocking motorways, in what rational, logical way does that lower global CO2 output? In what rational, logical way does that help victims of climate change? For example, people impacted by flooding or tropical storms or droughts. Doesn't. And I think it's a very unhealthy notion that just because someone can hide behind protests, they basically think they have a green light to do as they please. It reeks of entitlement. It really does. And I would put it to those who support them, the only reason you're supporting them is because you agree with the cause. Now, if a group of nationalists went out and vandalised something, you would not be saying, oh, it's peaceful protest. But what do we mean by peaceful protests? I mean, I think the term's thrown around a lot. Peaceful protest. Does it simply mean the absence of physical violence? For example, they're not throwing punches, they're not throwing Molotov cocktails, therefore they must be peaceful. I don't think so. I think if a group is knowingly seeking to stress out the public, to force people to miss essential appointments, to mess with people's lives essentially, that is not peaceful. And I've heard the argument, well, all protests cause some form of disruption. That's missing the point, and it's disingenuous. Yes, all protests cause some form of disruption, but not all protests are aimed at deliberately hurting the public. That's the difference. Other protests are targeted at a particular company or the government or a particular cause. With Just Stop Oil, they just wanted to hurt the public. And when you think about it, it doesn't really make much sense. If their big issue is being opposed to big oil, would it not make sense to specifically target Shell, ExxonMobil and so on? What they done is they stopped ambulances getting to hospitals. They stopped people getting to funerals, to weddings. It was incredibly obnoxious, incredibly entitled, downright criminal. So without further ado, I'll just read out the report. Because they've been cleared of this vandalism of Stonehenge. Bear in mind this is a World Heritage Site, an ancient site. I'm not sure what sort of substance they use, whether it would have any lasting damage or not, but that's beside the point, quite frankly. So yeah, to those who support them, those are my challenges. If there were a group of, before I get into this, if there were a group of patriots, self-described patriots, and they didn't use physical violence, right? And they just used like spray cans and said, we want Britain back or something like that. Would you seriously say, well, it's just peaceful protest? No, you wouldn't. You'd be calling it far-right intimidation. So why is it that one form of vandalism is okay just because you support the cause? It seems to me that you either believe in the rule of law or you don't. You can't cherry pick it. You can't say it's okay for those people to break the law because I agree with their ideology, but if someone else does it, oh, that's awful. You can't cherry pick. And I say the same thing to patriots, incidentally, those so-called patriots who go around waving England flags and chanting, and there has been violence in some of those demonstrations. They should be arrested. I don't think if they get involved in vandalism or intimidation. I am sick and tired of protesters thinking that they should have some sort of entitled rights. In a democracy, peaceful protest does not mean entitlement, and I'll come back to that, but I'll just read out the report first. The report's by Don Limbu and Sammy Jenkins, and it's from the 31st of October. Three Just Stop Oil activists who sprayed Stonehenge with orange powder have been cleared of causing a public nuisance. Rajan Naidu, 74, Oxford University student Liam Lynch, 23, and Luke Watson, 36, were acquitted following a 10-day trial at Salisbury Crown Court. They had denied all charges of damaging an ancient protected monument and causing a public nuisance after targeting Stonehenge as part of an ongoing fossil fuel protest by the Direct Action Group. The trio accepted taking part in the protest and cited in their defence reasonable excuse and the rights under Articles 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights to freedom of speech and freedom to protest. Mr Naidu from Birmingham, Miss Lynch from Bedford and Mr Watson from Essex have been accused of using two colour blasters filled with cornflour, talc and an orange dye to spray the monument in a protest on the 19th of June 2024. The court was told the trios targeted Stonehenge the day before last year's summer solstice. Around 15,000 people were due to gather and celebrate. Mr Watson had bought the equipment used in the attack and had borrowed his grandmother's petrol car to drive the co-accused to Stonehenge that morning. After the attack, both Mr Naidu and Miss Lynch sat in silence in front of the stones, where they were then arrested by police. The powder was promptly cleaned from the stones at a cost of £620. I hope at the very least they had to shoulder that cost. The defendants argued that it was a peaceful protest, that the rights of others were not greatly interfered with, that care had been taken in choosing the type of powder to use. How nice of them. There was no lasting damage to the stones, and they argued that protesting about fossil fuels was a legitimate cause. Simon Jones, prosecuting, alleged the protest, which was filmed by other Just Stop Oil supporters, had been carefully planned, and it was an act of blatant and clear vandalism. Giving his legal directions to the jury, Judge Paul Dugdale said they had to determine whether a conviction would be a proportionate interference with the protesters' rights, and said everyone's entitled to express their own opinion even if we disagree. If individuals disagree with what our government is doing in certain matters, they are entitled to protest about the government's actions or inactions, he said. There are times when protecting the right of freedom of speech and freedom to protest can mean that activity would otherwise be unlawful and be regarded as lawful by the court to protest those rights, he added. After the jury, which took 6 hours to deliberate, returned its verdict, the trio hugged each other in the dock. Representing the protesters, solicitor Francesca Cocciani from law firm Hodge, Jones and Allen said her clients were incredibly relieved by the verdict. The public nuisance charge in this case, which argued the protest would have caused serious distress, annoyance or inconvenience to the public, was wholly inadequate and in our view should never have been brought, and amounted to an affront to the right to protest, she said. It is a relief that the jury has decided to uphold the right to peaceful protest, she added. Ms Cocciani said the right to peaceful protest was an essential pillar of our democratic society, which time and again is being eroded. Okay, so obviously I wasn't there, I wasn't in the jury room, but I feel the jury kind of had no choice. I find it hard to believe everyone in that jury room said, oh, they're just peaceful protesters. Probably what happened was they said, well, we have to work with what we've got. And technically on this occasion they weren't causing a nuisance to the public, so they weren't blocking a road or a hospital lane or something like that. But I find it baffling how they could say with a straight face that they were innocent of vandalism. It clearly was vandalism by definition. Even their supporters would have to accept that. I don't know how you could say that's just dishonest. It's vandalism. You might say it's justified vandalism, but it is vandalism. And again, where is the rational logic in vandalising an ancient monument over environmentalism? Does that make any sense? They can say, oh, it wasn't, we carefully chose the powder. Why do it? If that had been, like, for example, an energy company's headquarters or Shell or something like that, it would at least make some sense. I'm not saying it would be justified or otherwise, but it would at least make sense. The infuriating thing about Just Stop Oil is the stunts don't make any sense in terms of what they target. And their supporters don't seem to get this. Their supporters are as arrogant as they are. And if you are their supporter, I am challenging you directly. How do you justify it? How? How does that stunt lower climate change emissions? How does that help flood victims? It just doesn't. So, given the information the jury had, given that they were directed that they had to determine whether this was affecting the public, then they probably had to return that verdict. But I still think it's disgraceful that they were cleared of vandalism. This is not a peaceful protest. It's only peaceful insofar as they weren't throwing punches, but vandalism should not be seen as peaceful. At least, not, well, especially not when it is a World Heritage Site. This wasn't just a group of rocks. This was Stonehenge, a world-renowned ancient site. You know, one of the most iconic landmarks in this country. I remember when the tree at Hadrian's Wall was cut down, there was outrage across northeast England. I visited Hadrian's Wall earlier this year with my girlfriend and my parents, and there was a stump there, and there's some talk that the little saplings might grow up or not, but you know. Well, in that case, those guys were just ostensibly attention seekers. They got a hefty prison sentence for that. But not a single person was making excuses for them. There were some saying, oh, it's just a tree, why such a tough sentence? But nobody was actually justifying it, nobody. And yet you will get people justifying this mindless stupidity. So I'm angry with that verdict because I think it sends out a message to other eco-extremists that they could basically do what they want. And as long as they hide behind protest, then it's okay. It's a very damaging message. And it reeks of entitlement. Of course, the European Convention of Human Rights was cited there. Nigel Farage and his party tried pushing this through Parliament the other day and it failed. And it's often been said, if we abandon that, we will be in company with Russia and Belarus as the only European country not to have it. I certainly wouldn't rush to ban it. Nevertheless, we do need to look at cases like this where common sense just goes out the window. What you have here is some arrogant demonstrators who have vandalised an ancient monument because they are hiding behind protests to do so. That's what they've done, they vandalised it. And this particular thing may not have hurt the public directly, but it's an incredibly dubious claim that it wouldn't have bothered anyone, that it wouldn't have caused distress might be a strong word, but I can imagine a lot of people saw that and felt angry about it, felt how arrogant of them. What about the grave of Charles Darwin? I'm not sure what the outcome in that case was, but surely desecrating, the deceased isn't exactly something that should be promoted. And the thing about the Just Stop Oil activists is they tend to be from a certain demographic. They tend to be middle class. A lot of them are either retirees or young students. There's not that many people in the middle age group. They're either very young or older, so either retired or young students. And yeah, they're overwhelmingly middle class. And it seems that a lot of them have a lot of time on their hands. But I just find them infuriating, quite frankly. And their supporters have this very gaslighting tendency to say, if you criticise Just Stop Oil, you don't have any concerns about climate change. What I am challenging you people to explain is, what is their strategies actually doing to help the problem? They say that they're concerned about rising global temperatures. They say that they're concerned about overusage of oil. Name a single one of their stunts that's helped do anything constructive to that problem. You might say, oh, well, they've brought attention to it. Most of the coverage has been about their stunts. not about the issue they claim to care about. But honestly, trying to reason with people on this is like, I don't know, it's a futile exercise. It really is. Because they're brainwashed. I think they are extremists. I don't think you can reason with them. I think they took a very smug sense of confidence of what brave martyrs they are. The rest of us are idiots, right? The rest of us are sheep, according to Just Stop Oil. And they're doing it for our own good. We should thank them. But I've made this point before. If we get more floods in this country, which is possible, particularly the south of England, slow-lying country, flooding has been a problem there. I just don't see a situation where, say, 2035 or 2040, people affected by a flood in the Norfolk Broads or other parts of the south of England say, oh, those Just Stop Oil people were absolutely right. They were right to block roads. They were right to vandalise national monuments. I just don't think it will go down that way. I think people will expect government action. But there is a way to bring attention to a cause, and I am not convinced their obnoxious tactics is the way to do it at all. They're not responsible environmentalists. And some of the things they say are outright lies. Billions of people will die in a few years. There is a problem with climate change, but saying that is incredibly reckless. I mean, that is brainwashing young people, scaring young people. It's actually immoral what they're doing. Also, I think that when you consider some of the people that are involved with Just Stop Oil, you do wonder, is there a certain degree of radicalisation going on? A bit like the far right and Islamist groups get involved in. When you see young students in their early 20s tearfully saying that they're petrified billions of people will die, you really do wonder what they're being subjected to. And the thing about these eco groups is because they're not physically violent, they're not planting bombs and so on, they come across as kind of harmless, at least to a minority of people that defend them, but most people are heartily fed up with them. So I think this verdict will anger a lot of people who say, okay, they've got away with it. And I think they have. Even if they were not technically guilty of the charge of disrupting the public, at the very least, they should have been found guilty of vandalism. It's absolutely nonsensical that they weren't. So it seems to me that the jury were directed not to even consider that. And that's a disgrace, because if that had been the main charge, they absolutely would have been guilty. And at the very least, they should have shouldered that £620 or whatever it was. So the good news is they're gone. Ostensibly, they've given up their campaign. I don't think it's because they feel that they had a success. I think it's because finally, they started facing justice. They started getting prison sentences. Absolutely deserved. If you're going to sabotage a motorway, you're putting lives at risk, you deserve to be in jail. It's not peaceful protest. I have zero sympathy for them. So maybe they finally just, there was a few hardcore activists, and then the less hardcore ones didn't want to go to jail, so they kind of fizzled out. But my goodness, they subjected the British public to profound stress, profound disruption for over 5 years, including the previous incarnations, Extinct Rebellion and Insulate Britain. Those three groups, Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil, they got gradually more and more extreme. 6 years, 2019 to 2025, of pissing off the public and infantile, stupid, cult-like stunts. Again, I challenge anyone who wants to defend them. How the hell is vandalising an ancient monument or a grave of a famous scientist or any of those other stunts, blocking roads, stopping people going about their business, how is that stopping or reducing CO2 emissions? It just isn't. Brainless, nonsensical, infuriating and entitled. And finally, what I'll say about this is, on a more broader point, yes, in a democracy, peaceful protest is important. It is. I've been on protests. If we don't have that, then we don't have the platform for dissent. So it is important. But I do think too many protesters are very entitled. They think that because they're hiding behind some cause, it entitles them to act in a certain way. And I'd say the same thing for the pro-Palestinian demos now. I happen to think there is a strong moral argument that they have with that. But there still has to come a point where you cannot just disrupt and disrupt and disrupt people going about their lives and think that it's okay. For one thing, you have to look at is what we are doing successful. This is another critique of Just Stop Oil. What they were doing wasn't producing any positive results, so why did they keep doing it? If they really, really wanted to see action on what they were campaigning about, they would have recognised that it wasn't working. So that suggests to me that they were more interested in exhibitionism than actually changing anything. You know, they love to be the martyr. I think the hardcore activists wanted to go to prison. They want to see themselves as martyrs. It's pathetic. But the fact of the matter is, to the vast majority of Britons, they were a damn nuisance. They were spectacularly unpopular. Even many people who agree that climate change is a pressing challenge, had no time for Just Stop Oil. And there were some absurd things you heard. For example, they held up one van, I believe, which was going to install solar panels. So they don't care. They just don't care. All they care about is their own zealotry. These are not moderate people. They're not reasonable people. And I don't think they're decent people. Because a decent person wouldn't knowingly cause such stress and disruption to another human being and show no remorse for it. So, you know, I have no respect for them. I'm not convinced that they're peaceful protesters just because they're not involved in physical violence. Disruption and vandalism to me is not particularly peaceful. And I think on a more broader point, we need to get away from this entitlement that just because you have a right to protest doesn't mean that you could do whatever you like and then hide behind protests. Again, their apologists would be taking a very different attitude if it was so-called patriots, nationalists protesting, using the same techniques. They would be singing a very different tune. So it's absolute hypocrisy to cherry pick on the rule of law. You either support it or you don't. And if you agree that vandalism is a criminal offence, then it follows that you can't just make excuses for those who are doing it because you happen to support their ideology. That's it. Is there any circumstances I would have a caveat? I certainly don't think on national monuments. Put it this way, if a Ukrainian national was to spray paint the Russian embassy, I'm not going to be too critical of them because it doesn't affect the British public. But spray painting a national monument is an attack on our heritage, on our history. I think it's different. I do.